Today we are concluding our series, Arise, and we are on the letter E. Now we've been talking about acceptance, recognition, inspiration, service, and now evangelize. And so we're going to talk about what it means to evangelize, not what it has always meant, although I want to give you just a little bit. Telling people about Jesus has never changed. The message of the gospel of Jesus Christ, that the perfect Lamb of God left heaven to live on this earth so that he would die a horrible death, be buried, rise again on the third day, all because of God's deep and abiding love for you and for me, that we could be washed clean of all of our sin, have a relationship with God and a hope for the future. That's the message, and that message doesn't change. But I want to share with you today a little bit about the methodology. I want to share with you just a moment about what we're going to talk about on when we think about sharing Jesus, a few things that we need to take into consideration. So join me in Matthew chapter 5, and we're going to have a little bit of an illustration time today. So if you'll join me in Matthew chapter 5, then we're going to talk about a couple of these things together. Because when we talk about evangelism, I really got to thinking about the smoker that my family got me, and I really love that smoker. I love using it. It's one of those that has the propane grill, but it's also got the smoker option, the charcoal option with the offset smoker attachment. I love it. It's tremendous. I enjoy doing it. But it got me to thinking, as we talk about sharing Jesus, there's two things that Jesus tells us that we're supposed to be, and that's what I want to unpack a little bit today. Because here's the thing. Telling people about Jesus, helping them understand about Jesus, we have to take context into our moment. And we've got to understand the context of our moment. So, Jesus tells us in Matthew chapter 5, beginning in verse 13, "You are the salt of the earth, but if the salt should lose its taste, how can it be made salty? It's no longer good for anything but to be thrown out and trampled under people's feet. You are the light of the world. A city situated on a hill cannot be hidden. No one lights a lamp and puts it under a basket, but rather on a lampstand and gives it light for all who are in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others so that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father in heaven." Salt and light. When we think about salt, we think about its seasoning capacity. Yeah, we can talk about how it purifies and how it cleanses, and it does all of those things, and it protects things. But one of the main reasons you use salt is because it's a seasoning. And light does reveal, and light guides, and light shows you the way. And light is also a warmth and a heat component. And so I got to thinking about how much I love good pork shoulder. And I love preparing that and putting that in the smoker. And I want to talk about that today because when we talk about salt and light, and we're talking about seasoning, and we're talking about all these different things, then we need to think about that also. When I look at this piece of meat, I began to think about what kind of flavor profile do I want? What outcome do I want? You know, because if I have pork, or if I have beef or chicken or fish or whatever it is that I may be smoking, even cheese, there's different flavor profiles that I personally want in those different areas. I've also experimented a little bit, not near as much as some other people. I am a rookie at all this. But what I do know is what I like and what I don't like. And I like in the pork shoulder, and sometimes in beef ribs, I like a little more heavy hickory or mesquite flavoring in that time frame. I also look at fish and chicken, and those are a little lighter weight for us, and I like a little more of the fruity wood, the apple, the cherry, some things like that. For me, pecan wood is right in the middle. But when I look at the seasonings, before I ever put it in the smoker, I have to prepare it, and I have to look at what am I wanting to have at the end result. Now, in our home, we have some standard things, and as I look at some of the things we put in, I feel that it's very Cajun. because I think it has what they call down in Louisiana the Holy Trinity. It's got garlic and onion and all these other things that are in it. In our family, when we are preparing this, I'll get a bowl, of course, and I'll throw in some garlic, and I'll prepare that, and I'll put some garlic in there. We like a lot of that. That's not a mistake. I do like a lot of that. And we like a lot of onion. I'll put in a dash of cayenne pepper as well because we like a little heat with what we're doing. And for some unknown reason, my wife got us onto cumin, and we absolutely love it. And we put it in just about everything that we season and everything that we cook. Now, sometimes I'll put in a variety of different things, but we need to make sure we have some black pepper in this. And I'll also put some actual salt in it as well. And so when we are looking at this, I'm always thinking, what flavor do I want? Now, we know the flavor that we like, and we know all the seasonings that we need to put into that. But that's because we're thinking about the flavor. We're thinking about, what do I want the outcome of this to be like? Well, I want it edible, obviously. I don't want it tough. I want it moist. I want it tender. I'd like to pull it apart and have pulled pork sandwiches, pulled pork plates, and all these other things. But a lot of that has to do with the seasoning that I'm putting into it. And you say, what in the world does this have to do with evangelism? Can you just get to that? It has everything to do with that. Because when you're looking at somebody else and you've prayed about somebody else and God has laid them on your heart, before you can ever tell them about the gospel, you're going to have to think about, what's the outcome that I'm looking at here? When I look at this conversation, what's the outcome? What am I wanting to accomplish? What am I wanting to have them understand? Because that is going to be important for us to realize, that the outcome desired, the taste desired, is incredibly important. If I just want to be a good friend, I'm going to have certain conversations. If I want to be an advisory person, I'm going to have certain conversations. If I'm parenting, or if I'm being a good son, or if I'm being a good friend, those are all different conversations. When I want to talk to somebody about Jesus, that's a different conversation. And I have to think about, what do I want as the outcome? Obviously, if I'm going to talk to somebody about Jesus, I want them to make a faith decision in Jesus. I think that's the best option for everybody alive. But I know not everybody's going to make that decision. And when I begin the process of talking to people or befriending people, or I want them to understand faith in Jesus, sometimes I can't just jump right off into that. I have to give it some time to sink in. I have to give it some time to marinate, if you will, on the process. Sometimes that's a month, 2 months. Sometimes it's 2 years. I know some people that have been working on this for several years because the person isn't ready yet to hear the message. Now, sometimes we're just not ready to pull the trigger. Sometimes people aren't ready to hear it. And we've got to find that balance of when people are ready to hear what's going on. And so often what I'll do is I'll take the seasoning and I will get it on here. One of the things that we have found that we really like also, and this is cheating because this is a premix, but this is a chili lime rub, and we really like that on ours. And so I'll throw that in pretty heavy. I have a honey garlic one I like on chicken, but I like this on that. And you're going to stir that up. And what I'm going to begin to do is I'm just going to begin to put this onto here. And I'm going to rub that in. I'm actually going to rub that in. And the point is that I want to get that seasoning onto it, and I want to give it an opportunity to get some of that flavor into the meat as well. This is what we're doing with evangelism. We're not just knocking on the door and asking them, if you're going to go to hell, do you want to fix that? That's not what evangelism is all about. The ultimate outcome is that somebody would come to faith in Jesus Christ. Absolutely. But you have to start in the store. And you've got to figure out what's the outcome. And I got to buy the seasonings I want, and I have to bring the seasonings home. Then I have to mix the seasonings. And then I'm going to put the seasonings, and I'm going to rub them into this meat and actually literally kind of rub it into the meat. and begin to get all sides. And I'm gonna flip this over, and I'm gonna put some more down here on this side. And once I get this all rubbed in, usually I'm gonna let it sit a while. Sometimes we use some liquids. Sometimes I use some Worcestershire sauce. Sometimes I use some other liquids that we like to use, just in order to get it to sink in a little bit into the meat. And so this is such an important part. If all I did was take a piece of meat out of the fridge and throw it on a grill, I am not doing it justice, and I'm not going to do everything else. I'm not going to do everybody else justice. Nobody wants to eat that. Nobody wants to consume that. And so as we begin to look at all of these situations, we have to realize that just like the preparation of this, we have to be concerned about the preparation of the gospel presentation. Not just the content of it, not just the meat of the matter, but we have to think about the seasoning and the outcome and the whole process that we want to understand. And so we begin to work this over and really rub this in the same way that we need to do the gospel with other people. We need to take time, not just throw it on heat, but we've got to give it time and work through that. So the first thing that we really need to take into consideration when we talk about salt and seasoning is this idea of the flavor profile, of the outcome desired with this particular piece of meat. But see, that leads us to the next situation, that we need to be considerate of the kind of meat that we are using. Some meat's drier, some meat is tougher. You know, if I want to prepare a skirt steak, that takes a whole different situation than if I want to prepare pork. If I want to prepare ribs, beef ribs, that for me, that's going to be a different way that I do that. If I have chicken, I prepare it differently. If I have fish, I prepare it differently because they're all different pieces of meat. You have different people in your life that you have different relationships with, you have different things in common with, and you don't need to have a script that all you do is spout off and spew off these things if they're not prepared to hear it, and if it's not in the context of what you need to talk about. We have to take into consideration the person that we are talking to realize that I am talking to particular people in particular times, and yes, I'll take that. Particular people in particular times. Thank you, Keith. And realize, now, Robin and Justice, I'm sorry, but we're going to have to clean the stage special this week. I appreciate you doing that. But we have to take into consideration the person. Just like when I'm preparing the seasonings, some seasonings I like across the board. And you know what? That's like the message of the gospel, isn't it? There's some things I'm not going to change. Jesus is the Son of God. Jesus is the perfect Lamb of God. Jesus died on the cross. Jesus was buried, dead and buried. Jesus rose again on the third day. Okay? That stuff I'm not going to change. That's my onion and garlic and cumin and cayenne. I don't change that. But sometimes I might adjust a few things around the outside edges of that flavor profile. Sometimes and that's dependent upon the person or the meat that I'm talking about. It depends. The people that you talk about, the person that you don't know very well, you have to start at a different point. The person you have a deep relationship with, you start at a different point. Sometimes you have relationships with people around some interests. Maybe you have a relationship with somebody purely based on your kids' sporting events, and you have a sports relationship with them. Or maybe you have a DIY relationship with people, or maybe you see the same checkout person when you go to the store every time. That's a different relationship, and you start in different places depending on the person that you're talking about. So it's not just the outcome that we need to be concerned about in this particular conversation. It's also, who am I talking to? That is important. You need to understand, who am I talking to? Is it a family member? Is it a close friend? Is it an acquaintance? Is it just a community person that I know and God's really laid on my heart? Evangelism is more than just telling those 5 or 6 truths. It starts younger. It starts earlier in that relationship, starts earlier in that conversation. Just like I'm not going to take a piece of meat out of the fridge, throw it on the grill, and pray something happens. That's irresponsible. there's too much value in this meat. Trust me, today there's too much value in this meat for me just to whimsically think fantasy that, hey, I'm going to throw it in and it's magically going to work. That's irresponsible of me. The responsible part of me says, and it should tell all of us, I need to be careful not to ruin it. I need to be careful not to waste the opportunity with it. And I need to give it some time for some of those seasonings to sit and to just be a part of what's going on. Our conversation may start with the weather and 6 months later end at the rising of Jesus from the grave. But it's all the conversations in the middle where it's just marinating and it's just working in it and working on itself. And this is an important part of our process. Context is important. Am I going to put this in? Am I going to put this in a slow cooker? Am I going to put this on a grill wrapped, or am I going to smoke it? The context is different. The type of meat is different, and I have to be aware of the context of what's going on. If I'm talking to somebody who's grown up in church, I may start later in this conversation because they've heard a lot of things. But if I'm talking to a friend of mine on social media, or if I'm talking to a friend of mine out in the community that hasn't grown up in church, that may not know all the churchy kind of language that we tend to use, well, I have to take in consideration the context of what we're doing. For example, as I mentioned earlier, if I've got a pork shoulder, I like to use hickory, mesquite, or pecan. If I'm using chicken, I may do a blend of wood and a blend of flavors. Fish, I prefer over in the apple and cherry flavor profile of things. It's all about the context. It's all about working the situation I have in front of me. I can't take a conversation that I have with somebody that's grown up in church and immediately translate that over. It's not going to work. For example, I did some heavy wood flavor smoke into a lighter piece of meat, and we didn't like that. And we thought, we really need to use this different flavor, because it's the same as true in evangelism. I need to be cautious about that. I need to be careful about that and recognize that everything that I would choose just to do this, I need to do the same choosing when it comes to sharing the gospel. What's the outcome? What's the taste that I want at the end? What is the temperament of the meat? Who's the person that I'm talking to? What's the context in which I am talking to them about Jesus? To know whether I need to start light or if I can dive straight into what's going on, because I need to be responsible with every relationship God's allowed me to have. I need to be responsible with every conversation. There are no throwaway conversations. Every conversation is important, even if you're just talking about the weather outside. Why? Because for us as followers of Christ, we understand that it can, over time, lead to something else. And we must be mindful of that in the process. Well, this is all about the communication of it. This is where we've talked about salt, and that it's good to flavor and the seasonings that we're going to use, and we've got to be aware of what we're using it in. But Jesus also calls us to be light. And one of the things that light does is give us heat. The sun not only provides us vitamin D, but it gives us heat as well. And we have that as an option to remember in this conversation too. If I were to take this, and we have done everything good so far, right? We've chosen the right meat. We've looked at the kind of meat. We've put the seasonings on it that we feel are appropriate for that. And we've let it sit and we've let it marinate. And we want to communicate the proper message. But here's the thing. If I throw this in to too hot, it's going to dry it out and it's not going to let it be real edible. And I know that because I've done that. I've done that. I have failed at this more than I have succeeded. I've just recently learned how to be semi-successful at what I'm doing with this. But that's the point. I kept trying. I didn't quit. I messed up once. It hurts and it cost me, but you know what? I wanted to do this right and I wanted to figure this out. And so I put it in, it was too hot and it dried it out, and I realized that, hey, I've got to add some water into that to make it more of a humid smoke to keep the moisture in. But if I make it too hot, then it's going to sear it. And in some cases, that's okay. But in this particular case, that's not what I want to do. I want the smoke to penetrate. I want it to get into the meat. I don't want it just to stay on the outside, and once you cut into it, there's nothing there. You know, Jesus says that's what the Pharisees were. They were whitewashed tombs. They looked great on the outside, but had nothing on the inside of value. And if I cook it too hot, I may have it look crusty and good on the outside, but I've got no value left on the inside. If I cook it too low and I don't get it hot enough, but if I try to take it off before it's ready, if I don't reach that internal temperature that's necessary, then I'm allowing all kinds of little nasties to get in there and the bacteria to rise up because I'm not taking care of the evil part that can come in. Let me help you understand something. Evangelism is no different. Having conversations and building relationships so that we can help people move forward in their spiritual journey, in their life journey, to see and understand Jesus more tomorrow than they did yesterday. If I keep it too easy, see, I don't want to walk up to somebody and say, hey, if you died tonight, you're going to go to hell? Now, see, that was something that we were taught when I was taught growing up. That's the question you ask. If you were to die tonight, where would you go? But the context of 2020 is different than the context of 1980 in a lot of ways, but also in this way. You just can't walk up anymore and say, hey, if you died tonight, would you go to heaven or hell? Why? Because in 1980, they would understand mostly that's a spiritual question that you're asking. Today, if I walk up to somebody that I don't know and I don't have a relationship with, and I said, hey, if you died tonight, would you go to heaven or hell? They're thinking I'm going to shoot them. So we've got to put ourselves in the context and realize I can't come at them too heavy. I can't come too hot. But I don't need to be so easy and so low temperature that I never get around to sharing the gospel. I don't need to make it so easy to befriend me that they never see that I act any different even though I claim Christianity. There's got to be a certain level of heat. There has to be interaction there. And you've got to get the temperature raised to get beyond the evil, but keep it under being restrictive and they just refuse you altogether. There's a happy medium there that we've got to take into context, just like when I take this and I put it in to cook. I don't want it too hot. I got to Goldilocks this thing. I don't want it too hot and I don't want it too cool. I want it just right. So I'm going to put it in at 225 to 250 and we're going to smoke for a long time. I was always taught low and slow makes it better. And so that's what I've learned to do. And that's the final thing we have to talk about is time. This isn't a microwave situation. Any more than I could put this thing into the microwave and set it and have it come out. I know they try to sell us on the fact that I could do that in the microwave, but I have yet to figure out how that's actually going to function in an appropriate way that I want to eat. You know, I can throw it in there and it can do its little thingy, but when it comes out, it's like, I can bounce it on the floor because it's nothing but rubber that's left, But if I want to do it right, I've got to take my time. I've got to do it right, and I have to take my time. This is not a microwave. This isn't done in 15 minutes. This 8-pound roast, this shoulder, isn't going to be done in 15 minutes. And I can put it in the Instapot, and it can be done in an hour or so. But let me tell you something. It can be done, but I think it's a lot better when you just let it go low and slow for a long time. And evangelism is a lot like that. We've got to season it. We've got to look at what we want at the end of the day, at the end of a week, at the end of a relationship. What do I want? I have to consider the person that I'm talking to, the context that I'm talking to them in. And I have to remember that it's different for each person. I don't need to have one script and expect everybody to understand that. I need to reach people where they are because you know what? Isn't that what grace is all about? Legalism says, I'm just going to say it and you just got to either catch it or don't catch it. I don't really care. Grace says, I'm going to come to you. Isn't that what Jesus did? Jesus left heaven. He came to us. And the Word became flesh and lived among us. I must be aware of the context that I'm speaking. To whom am I speaking? Build in context clues. Build in context conversations to move conversations, to move relationships. Raising the heat enough, but not too much. And take our time. Because when I put this in the smoker, and I manage the heat, and I manage the smoke to where I get that smoke line going deeper and deeper in, and I get that temperature up where it needs to be, I'm going to take it after about 6 hours. Then I'm going to wrap it. And at that point, I'm going to finish it off. I'm going to wrap it tight. I'm going to put it in a hot oven to make sure that all of the connecting tissue breaks down and it becomes easy to work, easy to pull apart, easy to get into the middle of that. But that's time. In every relationship that you are praying about how to share the gospel, these are the 5 things you have to remember. What's the outcome I want? Who's the person I'm talking to? What's the context I'm talking to them in? How hot can I make the communication? And time involved. There will come a time, just like I will have had this in the smoker long enough, and then I've really got to raise the heat. But if I do it too soon, I'm going to ruin it. I let it in long enough to start to break down, and then I put it into the heat, because then it becomes easy to pull apart. And we, by the power of the Holy Spirit, can take our time, because people's lives we must be responsible with. We take the time and we season it, and we apply the light and the heat appropriately. And at the right time, when it's time, we wrap it all up and we ask the tough questions, just like putting it in at the end. And we, by the power of the Spirit, over the course of time, are going to watch people break down and be ready to receive all that God has for them. This is evangelism, because it's a relationship. The relationship that God established in Genesis 1, that was broken in Genesis 3, that was reinvigorated by the gospel of Jesus Christ, is available to you to share with others. Let us be about the gospel sharing of this message. Share the message. But remember, it takes time. It's salt and it's light. Jesus said, "You are the salt of the earth. But if you should lose its saltiness, what good is it? You are the light of the world, not to be hidden, but to be revealed." Be salt, be light, and let's change the world together. You may be here today and you recognize that you've heard the gospel message today in a way you've never heard it before, and you want to respond to that. And our musicians are going to come in just a second, and we're going to have an opportunity for you to make a response, to say, yes, I want to receive Jesus. I want to make that choice. I'm ready to make that choice. For many of you that are making that decision today, please put that in the chat. Email us, message us, let us know of the decision that you're making. I would love to have the chance to talk to you about that. For others of you today you've been challenged to evangelize, but not necessarily just to be that person shouting at the corner light, but to be somebody who's building relationships and taking the time necessary to honor God, to honor others, to love God and to love others so that our world can be changed by the power of the gospel message. Won't you answer the challenge today? Let's pray together.